We often make the promise to our loved ones that we're willing to do whatever it takes to protect them and keep them safe at all times. However, the death penalty is it's a punishment for those who harm your loved ones, and it's not being enforced enough. The death penalty was first introduced here in the United States in 1612. However, at this point in time in our history, it was viewed as too extreme and was temporarily suspended. However, the death penalty was reinstated in 1976 in Florida, Georgia, and Texas, and was ruled constitutional. The death penalty should be enforced more and applied more because it discourages murderers from committing horrible acts of crime, because now they fear for their life if they choose to harm an individual. This benefits society because the penalty removes killers off the street, making the streets safer for ourselves and our loved ones. The death penalty should be enforced more because this law protects innocent people, and it brings justice to the victims of these crimes, and it also brings closure to the families of the victims, knowing that the person who assassinated their loved one is being made accountable for their actions. My proposition to you is that capital punishment, also known as the death penalty, should be enforced more to protect innocent lives and bring justice to the dead and their families. My first reason for this is that the death penalty is not being enforced as much as it can be. According to Jacoby, since 1976, approximately 875 prisoners have been sentenced to death row. However, 100 prisoners have also been released, which shows that we're not taking full advantage of the sentencing. Also, the national average for the death penalty being sentenced is 2.2%. Here in California, the percent is 1.3%. And these numbers are in relation to the number of prisoners currently in our prison system and the population in that state or country. My second reason is that the death penalty protects the lives of innocent people. According to Bronson, with every prisoner that is removed off the street and is executed, 18 fewer murders occur, and that's on average. In the state of New York, former Governor George Pataki made the statement that during his time of governing, crime in New York decreased by 1/3, and that's since 1976 when the death penalty was reinstated. Those against the death penalty make the suggestion that death penalty is uncruel, inhumane, and cruel, and that sometimes lethal injections aren't administered correctly and things go wrong. This is true. However, things go wrong in surgeries and hospitals. Prescription drugs have good intentions, but sometimes people misuse them. Is that an argument to abolish those as well? Not necessarily. The possibility of things going wrong exists. However, that possibility of actual happening is very rare. And let's remember that these prisoners are in jail for a reason. They're not exactly the most innocent people, and they didn't think twice about taking an innocent person's life. My third reason is capital punishment brings justice to the victims and their families. Sherry Byrne was only 21 when she was brutally raped and beat for 10 hours and then stuffed into the trunk of a car. And her murder was found guilty and executed in the state of Ohio. Also, not only does these crimes affect the victim, but they also affect their loved ones. Frederick Romano has this experience as well. His daughter was raped and mutilated, and 15 years later, this experience remains fresh in his memory, and the bruises of this experience never go away. However, there is some comfort in knowing that the person who assassinated your loved one is not paying for their crime. In conclusion, by enforcing the death penalty, we can assure safety to the lives of innocent people and bring justice to the dead and their families. By enforcing the death penalty, we also discourage any people from committing horrible acts of crime. Also, the death penalty takes murders off the street. And by enforcing the death penalty, we also show the public that we are taking all necessary precautions to ensure that their safety is the number one priority. Lastly, we should enforce the death penalty in memory of all the victims. Prisoners on death row are far from innocent. They didn't think twice about murdering an innocent person. They didn't show mercy while they were carrying out their crime. And they didn't think twice about how their violent acts would affect the victim or their loved ones. Thank you.
Do you really believe that the death penalty should be enforced? With that said, as a matter of fact, there are many organizations that are against the death penalty, including the American Civil Liberties Union. I believe that the U.S. should abolish the death penalty because it's cruel, it costs too much money, and many innocent people have died from it. Which brings me to my first point. The death penalty is cruel. Yes, you could say that they deserve it, or they had it coming to them, but do they really deserve to die in the way that they do? Lethal injection is the standard in which people are executed. As mentioned in the Public Library of Science, the reason why the prisoners suffer is because they are being administered by unskilled workers. And when this happens, the anesthesia could be not good levels, and there have been instances where the chemical burns have occurred. And also, there's some cases where they've suffered for 30 minutes or longer. To me, that sounds like a very painful way of dying. But don't take my word for it. According to an article written by Clive Stafford Smith, this is what happens when a lethal injection is given. Quote, the prisoner is strapped to a girder and injected with a barbiturate, which knocks him out. This is followed by a paralactic drug. If the dose of the barbiturate is not sufficiently concentrated on the IV, is not inserted properly, the prisoner remains awake, able to feel the pain but frozen in silence due to the drug. Now that is cruel and unusual punishment. I would also like to point out that the death penalty is issued in a discriminatory fashion. As reported by the American Civil Liberties Union, black offenders who kill white victims are at a greater risk of a death sentence than others, primarily because they are substantially more likely to be charged by the state attorney with a capital offense. Furthermore, the U.S. General Accounting Office has also found out, quote, our synthesis of the 28 studies shows a pattern of evidence indicating racial disparities in the charging and imposition of the death penalty after deferment case. By racially discriminating someone, it's also being cruel. So, for my second point, death penalty is a waste of money because it doesn't benefit society in any way. The National Coalition Against the Death Penalty has reported that New Jersey taxpayers have paid over $250 million since 1983 to execute no one. I mean, no one was executed. That money could have been used to, let's say, for education or to give more resources to the police departments. Former New Jersey prosecutor Michael Murphy has said, quote, if you were to ask me how $11 million a year would best protect the people of New Jersey, I would tell you by giving the law enforcement community more resources. So like I said, the money could be used for something else. Also, Democratic Representative Gail Tracy has said, quote, people will say we can't put a price on justice, but in fact, we do put a price on justice when we are not able to give our district attorneys, our police departments, and attorney general the funding they need. So again, the money is not being used right. And if it's a matter of how much it costs, there's a better alternative to the death penalty. Life without parole costs significantly less. From the article that Smith wrote, it says, quote, in California, the annual cost of the present death penalty system is currently $137 million. By contrast, a system of life without parole would cost $11.5 million. There is a big difference between those numbers. So the death penalty should not even exist. Which brings me to my last point. There have been many cases in which innocent people have died from being wrongfully executed. Here's an example. Cameron Todd Willingham was executed on February 17, 2004 for the purported arson murder of his daughters. But after the fact, after he was killed, the leading authorities decided afterward that the testimony for his death was baseless. So he could have been very well innocent. And another example, Jesse J. Tefera was executed on May 4th, 1990 for the murder of a state highway patrolman and a visiting Canadian constable. But again, after the fact, a recreation of the crime scene strongly suggested that another man who was convicted, Walter Rhodes, actually committed the crime. So he could have been innocent as well. We would never know. For a more recent example is an African-American man named Troy Davis was executed by lethal injection on September 21st, 2011 for the 1989 killing of police officer Mark McPhail. 7 of the 9 key witnesses, after he was dead, said that they recanted their evidence, saying that it was not good. So he could have been innocent as well. So in conclusion, I believe that the U.S. should abolish the death penalty because it's cruel, it costs too much money, and many innocent people have died from it. Thank you.